Welcome and thank you for joining us today. This webinar is part of our Industrial IT webinar series. My name is Tony Mannion and I'm the Sales Development Manager at SolutionsPT. And today we're going to talk about ransomware protection for OT systems. So if we look at the agenda, I'm going to start off just by talking a little bit about what we mean by ransomware, a very general overview. And then why it's such a hot topic with our customer base, because it certainly is something that our customers are talking about a lot. I'm then going to look at typically how ransomware works, and I'll be taking an example of a particular ransomware strain for this. And it's important to know that when we then move on to some of the current methods of defense, and also how we use Proteus to help our customers protect against ransomware. So ransomware, we're probably all aware of it, we've probably all heard about it. The main reason that ransomware exists is to stop customers getting to data within their systems. So it blocks our ability to access that data and then asks for money to be able to give us access to that data again. So it's a way of really generating revenue from cybersecurity attacks. And that's probably why ransomware is such a growth area within cybercrime, because it is something that's been able to be monetized. And you've often heard the stories about ransomware actually being sold to criminals rather than just being used to infect computers within the internet. So ransomware, the main reason for it is to stop people having access to their files. That's usually done by encrypting them. So why is it a big topic for our customer base? Well, there are a number of reasons. Firstly, there's been some reports in the news about some high-profile infections. And I've put down WannaCry, GoldenEye and Petya because they're probably the most well-known. But certainly over the last day or two, people have started to talk about Bad Rabbit as a new variant of ransomware. And that's one of the issues because new variants are being released at a large rate by the criminal community. 60% of all cyber attacks are ransomware. As I say, because it's easy to monetize, it's probably the fastest growing area of cybercrime. But we've also got to remember that it's not the only area of cybercrime. And so what we're going to talk about today is a solution to help protect against ransomware. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and people should be mindful of other types of infections that they need to protect against. We all went through training, or a lot of us have been through training, where we were warned about clicking on links within emails or opening attachments within emails. Some of the new delivery methods don't even require us to do that. And I was reading recently about one case where actually hovering over a link is enough to get the infection onto your PC. So there's a lot of innovation, unfortunately, within cybercrime, and so we've always got to be learning, we've always got to be improving how we defend against it. A lot of customers tell me that it's unlikely that anybody's going to target them. And I think the thing about ransomware is the vast majority are not targeted attacks. This is broadcast across the internet, and the infection itself will find ways into a system. The infection itself will actually choose the victims. So you don't have to be targeted, you just have to be unlucky to be hit by a ransomware attack. And if we look at the ultimate, where customers have to pay a ransom, 20% of businesses that actually pay the ransom still are unable to get their data back. And this can be because the encryption that's used is difficult to unencrypt and doesn't always work. It could just be that they don't see the point of sending out the encryption key because they're unlikely to get any more money from you. But from my point of view, there's another reason, or there's another couple of reasons why it's a hot topic. Firstly, in the responses we get from our customers, a huge percentage of our customers say that cybersecurity is going to be a priority for them over the next 12 months. And they're looking at their vendors and their partners to help understand how they're able to start that journey and how they're able to continue on that journey in a way that's going to help them with their protection. More worrying, 72% of companies are citing cybercrime as a reason for not adopting technology. When you consider that within the UK manufacturing, we're the lowest country of all the G7 countries for productivity, we really need to use new technology to help us compete on a global market. And that's going to become more and more important over the next number of years with the uncertainty that Brexit's going to bring. So adopting new technology is crucial to our industry. And we need to make sure that our customers have a level of comfort that will actually allow them to adopt this new technology. So I think cybersecurity in general and ransomware in particular are going to be really important going forward, and ways of defending against them are going to be hugely important to our customers. I want to talk a little bit about how ransomware works, and as I said earlier on, this is an example, but it's using CryptoLocker, probably the predominant type of ransomware, as the example. So it's fairly standard across different types of ransomware. So the first thing an infection will do is it will try to communicate with a web server. Now, we used to believe that if we didn't have connection to the internet, we would be safe. But actually, for newer variants of ransomware, if it's unable to connect to the web server, then it automatically deploys. The only reason it needs to connect to the web server is to become more efficient. And what it will do is it will send information about the software, the common software that's loaded on the machine, up to the web server so that they can identify known vulnerabilities. Now, with a lot of our customer base, one of the issues they have is that they're running legacy software. With newer software, the vendors and the authors will release patches as soon as a known vulnerability is identified. But with legacy software, software that's out of mainstream support, very often you won't be receiving those patches. And therefore, things like ransomware, because of the increased number of vulnerabilities, will be able to infect more machines, be able to infect them more efficiently, and be able to spread more efficiently. And so a lot of our customers, because of the situation they are in with legacy systems, are looking even more carefully at solutions to cybersecurity. The virus will also do a number of activities once it's infected the machine. And one of the first things it does is it deletes shadow copies of the victim machine. So vssadmin.exe is actually a facility that's used by Microsoft in a number of different ways. Firstly, it's used by most commercial backup technologies that are available. And secondly, it's also used to help develop restore points for your PC. So anybody who's run Microsoft Windows on a PC will probably know that it will create restore points that you can move back to. Once these shadow copies of the victim's machine are deleted, it stops that process from happening. It'll also stop backup facilities from taking backups of the system because they won't have access to the vssadmin.exe file. It then propagates itself throughout the file system, and it does it in such a way that if you turn your machine off and turn it back on again, you'll be left in the same state of infection as you were when you turn the machine off. So really, what it's doing here is it's trying to cut off the restoration options that you have. Whilst all this is going on, it's actually starting to encrypt the copies of your files and the data that you hold. And again, it does this from the very beginning to try to limit the amount of restoration points that you would have available. Once it's been through that process, it'll then trigger the splash screen that gives you details of how you pay and how to get an encryption key back to unencrypt your files. And that's very often the first thing that we know. That's very often the first time that we know that we've got an infection. And that's really at the point where the panic sets in and you wonder what you need to do to be able to get back to a good state and to be able to continue with a working system. So that's just a little bit about how ransomware works. And I think it's important just to understand that when we talk about different ways of defending against ransomware infections. So I want to look at a couple of the current methods of defense. And probably the two that are the most well known in this area would be antivirus and ransomware detection software. Both of these solutions are part of an overall cybersecurity defense strategy and should be used as such. But when we talk about ransomware and we talk about zero-day attacks, how antivirus and ransomware detection software work is that they need a signature so that they can identify any infections. Now we know that every day there are thousands of new variants of ransomware being produced. They're all based around the same theme, but there are slight differences, and therefore the signature would be different. And so an infection may not be picked up by these softwares. However, they are extremely good at identifying known problems, known infections. So they should be used as part of an overall cybersecurity strategy. But for zero-day infections, for brand new infections, it's unlikely that they'll pick them up. A lot of customers talk to me about the fact that their system's air-gapped. And I think a number of years ago, it was probably quite easy to maintain an air-gapped system. For people who don't know, air-gapping is really where you just have no outside connection whatsoever. So it's just an internal network with no breach to the outside world. In 2013, in America, there was a survey done on 40 air-gapped sites. They were mostly in the power generation industry. And within those 40 sites, on average, there were 9 connections to the outside world. And I think with new technology, with new methods of working, I think it's getting harder and harder to actually air-gap a system completely. And if we believe our systems are air-gapped, then we should be on a very regular basis checking to make sure no connections have been introduced. Because a connection that's monitored is a lot safer than a connection that's unknown. The other element is that we saw earlier on that with new variants of ransomware, they don't need a connection to the outside world to actually trigger. So not having a connection is no defense against a ransomware infection. But the final method is actually paying the ransom. So if there's no other option, it may be that you have to follow the instructions on the screen and pay the ransom. Now the problem with that is that, as we've already said, 20% of people don't recover their data following an infection. The other issue is, in many cases, if you do recover your data, it actually highlights the fact that you've been willing to pay a ransom. And statistics show that you're 31% more likely to then be targeted for ransomware attacks. So paying the ransom might be a short-term solution, but long-term it could be creating a lot more issues. I want to talk just a little bit about a recommendation from Gartner this year. And really what they're saying there is something that I deeply believe and I've spoken to many customers about. My view is that the first journey for cybersecurity should be to make sure that you have Plan B in place and that Plan B works. So if you take the view that there's a very good chance you will receive an infection, then it's about understanding what to do in those circumstances and how to get back to a good known state. And I think that's a fantastic bit of advice when we start looking at what should be our first step to combat the threat of cybersecurity. And really that's what our Proteus solution does. So Proteus is a disaster resilience solution. Disaster resilience is not simply backing up your data and applications. It has another element to it, and that is to be able to get you back up and running in the shortest way possible. And there are a number of different options that you can use within Proteus to actually get your applications and your data back in the event of a disaster. And so disaster resilience is really important for any business in their fight against cybersecurity threats. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Proteus works. And Proteus backs up your data and applications at a folder and file level. For the sake of efficiency, Proteus will only back up changes since the previous backup so that it saves storage space and also it doesn't congest the networks. So it's a very efficient way of backing up. However, there's another advantage to that. It means that to do that, it has to compare the folders and files from the previous backup to their current state. And so it can identify where changes have happened, what new files have been added. And within Proteus, there's a built-in algorithm that's able to check those changes and is able to identify unusual behavior, such as encryption. And when a file is encrypted, the size of the file increases considerably. So there are a number of identifiers that the algorithm can use to see if suspicious behavior is happening in between the backups of your system. If it identifies one of those, it actually notifies our managed platform support team. Now, our support team are trained and experienced engineers who understand the OT systems. So they're able to take this information and understand whether this is suspicious within our environment. At that stage, they'll contact the customer. It might be that something's been happening on the plant that would explain these changes, but we can determine that by having a conversation with the customer. If we believe that nothing has changed or nothing should have changed, then we can then go through a process to make sure that any infection is minimized. So the first thing that we would do is we'd make sure that the customer is able to isolate the machine from the network so that it's not able to infect the rest of the machines on the network. And then we'll work with the customer to find the best way for them to get access to the critical applications that have been backed up. Because of the actions within Proteus, we're also able to see and identify the likely point when the infection happened. And that allows us to roll back the system to a position where prior to the infection and to what we call a known good state. And so we're able to roll it back and get the system back available to the customer in the shortest possible time. Once we've done that, the customer is then able to remove the infection from the infected machine and go through a process to get that machine back in a fit state and back on the plant floor and back supporting your business. So it's not a quick process, but it certainly takes minutes rather than days to get to a position where you can recover from a suspected infection or an actual infection. And when we look at ransomware and we realize that for the OT environment, it's about the availability of the system, then reducing that time is hugely valuable to our customer base. So if we just look at a quick summary of what I've said, most ransomware attacks aren't targeted, and so it just looks for vulnerabilities in everybody's system. And as I said, for people who pay the ransom, very often they can become targeted shortly afterwards. Air gapping isn't a defense. We don't need internet connections to become infected. So we need to look at other ways that we can protect against an infection. Unless a signature is known, most of the current antivirus and ransomware protection solutions won't be able to identify the protection. And with thousands of new ransomware variants being produced daily, those signatures are very difficult to get right. And as I've mentioned, paying the ransom is pretty much a lottery as to whether you'll be able to get your data back and escape future targeting. I mentioned at the beginning that ransomware was one component of a cybersecurity solution. And at SolutionsPT, we talked to our customer about a staged approach. And really, if we look at the third column along, manage, that's where disaster resilience sits. I actually think that putting that in as a first step is a good move. But the main thing is understanding what you have on site. Look at what you've got. Have a certified person who's able to audit your system and identify known vulnerabilities. Pretty soon after an audit, there should be a lot of information that helps you to make some quick wins in the fight against cybersecurity infections. Once you do that, you need to make sure that your system continues to be in a good and healthy state. And if you follow those 3 steps, what we've found with our customer base is that they then have the confidence to look at how they can adopt new technologies, how they can make changes to their systems that are going to benefit the business. And that's hugely important for a lot of our customer base. We are going to be talking more and more about this approach and go into detail on a lot more of these subjects. And we have a number of events coming up in November, the 28th and the 30th, one in the north and one in the south. And if you wanted to attend those events and learn a little bit more about how we're working with customers and our partners are working with customers to help them defend against cybersecurity threats, then please log on to the website and you will be able to register for those events. Those events are free of charge. For people who can't make those events, we'd love to be able to talk to you a little bit more about what we're doing and learn certainly about what you're doing, because it's your feedback that helps us determine our roadmap going forward. So please feel free to contact us. Somebody will be able to talk you through how we're approaching the market and see if it fits with your ideas, see if it helps with what you're currently trying to achieve. We also have a number of further webinars that talk about cybersecurity, as well as data sheets on the Proteus product and other products that we're introducing into the marketplace. And these can be accessed through our SolutionsPT website. And again, we've put the link to the website on the screen for you there. So that's all I wanted to cover today. I'd like to thank you for listening and staying with us today. As I say, it's a small element of a big problem. Please talk to us and let's understand what we need to do going forward to make sure that our customers remain safe.